So, welcome to the next FitSit class. So, I thought for the first class of the term would review one of the earlier lessons, the ability to side bend. So, if you just make sure you're sitting towards the front edge of your chair, and have the feet and knees a comfortable distance apart. You don't want the knees to be gripped together, so about hip width or shoulder width apart. And then just as you're sitting, just check that you haven't tucked your feet behind the knee. So you really want to have the ankle more or less underneath the knee. And then just as you're sitting here, see if you can just get a sense of how your weight is distributed in sitting. Quite often there'll be a habit of sitting more to one side than the other. So just notice if that might be the case for yourself. And then also just notice what kind of shape is your spine making. So do you get a sense that the spine is a little bit rounded, or the opposite to that would be to overly push the lower back area forward. So just get an idea of how it is you're sitting. And then just as a test movement, see if you can bring your weight over onto the right side. So I'm going to mirror the movement. So if you bring the weight over onto the right side, and then just come back to centre. And just notice how it is that you tend to do that. Quite often, what happens is people will tilt to one side, and you can see I'm lifting the foot. That's also something that's very common. And then come back to centre. So, and again, just take your weight over to the right side, and just notice how it is you're doing it. Does your head tend to make a big movement over to the side and then come back? And then try the same onto the left sit bone. So just bringing your weight over onto the left side, and again just notice how easy or otherwise is it for you to do that. So one way again is that quite often people will tilt the spine over and the other foot lifts, but you can perhaps feel how that tilting makes you much more vulnerable to losing the balance and to fall. So another way of bringing the weight onto, say, the right side, which we'll be exploring in class, is in fact to side bend over to the right, and then side bend over to the left. I'm going to use just this doorstop here, just to show you what I mean. So some people, they do this to bring the weight over onto the side. Can you see, keeping the spine completely straight to go from one side to the other, and that's often a pattern that's repeated in walking. And what we're trying to explore today is this ability that the whole of the spine begins to curve to one side and the other. I knew it had another use that thing. So please come again to the front edge of the chair, and then bring your attention to your left buttock or your left sit bone, and see if you can just begin to lift the left sit bone a few times. So just lifting the left sit bone a few times, so that if you wanted to, you could slide the fingers of your left hand just underneath the buttock as it creates space, just lifting the left side of the sit bone a few times. Now just notice, what do you do with the left foot as you do that? So one way of helping you to lift the left sit bone is to press down into the left foot, the left leg, just to help you find that movement of just lifting the left sit bone. Good. And then pause, and then just take a rest for a moment. So it can be quite hard to find that movement. So please bring your left hand onto the top of the head. So as you bring the hand onto the top of the head, careful you're not squashing yourself down. So you want to try and think of the spine being nice and long, so as if my head is coming up to meet the hand rather than the hand going down to meet the head. And then keep the elbow, the left elbow, pointing out to the side, and then think of bringing the left elbow down towards the left side of the pelvis, and then come back. So you're just thinking of bringing the elbow down towards the left side of the pelvis. So it's not a big movement at all, but the direction is from the elbow to the left side of the pelvis. You see, if I think of it just going down to the floor, effectively I'm taking my head outside the base of support. So you want to just think, can you allow the elbow just to move in the direction of the left side of the pelvis? Now, as you're doing this movement, again keeping the hand light, just check that you're not tensing the jaw and that you're not holding the breath. And you'll begin to feel, as you're bringing the elbow down, how your weight shifts over onto the right side, and again that the left side of the pelvis, the left buttock, becomes a little bit light. And can you feel how that shape I just showed with the doorstop is beginning to happen, that the spine is beginning to curve a little bit over to the right as you bring the left elbow down. Good. Now pause, just rest the hand back on the leg, and then just take a rest for a moment. And then once you've just had that brief rest, make sure you're once more sitting towards the front edge of the chair. And then try again just to press into the left foot, to think of lifting the left buttock or the left side of the pelvis to bring the weight over onto the right side. Just see if that maybe is a little bit easier as a result of the variation that we've just been doing. And as you're doing this, try to allow the left ear just to tilt a little bit towards the left shoulder. So again, just exploring your ability to initiate this transference of weight to the right by pressing down into the left foot and tilting the pelvis effectively down to the right. Just do it a few more times and notice now what happens to the ribs. And then pause and rest. It's very interesting. I'm now working on my second book, which is going to be about neck and shoulders. And I was looking at a few studies last night talking about the prevalence of neck pain, particularly amongst office workers. And these studies are looking at things like posture, gender, exercise, and trying to correlate those factors to how likely it is that someone is going to suffer from neck pain or not. But what struck me when I looked at these studies is none of them are actually looking at how a person is weight transferring and moving through their spine, which is me kind of missing the point if you're not taking that into account. So come once more to the front edge of the chair, and this time bring your attention to your ribs, particularly the ribs in sort of the middle part of the chest. And then think of your ribs as though they're pushing out to the right and then come back. So you're just thinking of the ribs pushing directly out to the right and then coming back. So if I use the doorstep again, just to show you, it's the ribs are just moving directly over to the right and then coming back to the right and coming back. And as you just explore that, can you feel what happens to the spine again? So as the ribs move to the right, it can cause the spine to curve once more over to the right, and your left sit bone is becoming light, just as we did before. And you'll notice how as you bring the weight over onto the right side, that side becomes longer, if you allow it to, and the left side becomes shorter. So just by thinking of the ribs moving over to the right. But then just check what's happening to the head. So you don't want the head to be shifting over to the right. It's once more, can you allow the left ear to come just a little bit closer to the left shoulder. Good. And then just pause and take a rest. And then once you've rested, come back to thinking now of the left side of the pelvis lifting a little bit and the ribs moving a little bit to the right. So you're thinking now of the pelvis and the ribs together to help you shift the weight over onto the right. And maybe you could begin to think actually of initiating this from the foot and the pelvis, so they help the ribs to go over to the right, rather than the ribs just pulling you over to the right. So you just include this idea of the pelvis moving at the same time as the ribs shifting to the right. And then pause and take a rest again, just to give you a little bit of a break from the movement. And then come once more to the front edge of the chair, and now bring your attention to your right shoulder. And now think of your right shoulder going to the right and slightly up, and then come back. So you think of the right shoulder going to a little bit further to the right and up, and then come back. And again to the right and slightly up, and then come back. So just doing this a few more times, and you'll notice if you allow the right shoulder to go to the right and slightly up, the left shoulder sinks down a little bit unless you're holding it up. So try and let that shoulder be relaxed. And think of the right shoulder going to the right and up slightly. And see if you can feel it in that allows the weight to shift over onto the right buttock or to the right sit bone. And once again, the spine is brought into that kind of C shape to facilitate the movement to the right and up. Now, the thing to be careful of here is try not to lead with the elbow. So you see, if I lead with the elbow, it begins to use muscles up here, where if you think of just the shoulder going to the right and up, the elbow and arm can stay soft and available to do other things. just check as you're doing this that you're not holding the jaw or holding the breath, clenching the jaw I should say, or holding the breath. You're just exploring the ability of thinking of the right shoulder going to the right and up, so as to bring the weight onto the right sit bone. Good. Now pause and just take a rest for a second. You can sit to the back edge of your chair. And then once you've had that brief rest, come once more to the front edge of the chair, check the feet are solidly on the floor. And now can you think of doing a few movements of lifting the left side of the pelvis to bring the weight onto the right hand side, and then think of the ribs for a few movements going to the right, and then think of the right shoulder going to the right and slightly up to bring the weight onto the right hand side. So you alternate of thinking of the pelvis, the ribs, and then the right shoulder going to the right and slightly up. So you're just alternating pelvis, ribs, and the right shoulder. And then see if you can begin to think, so instead of three parts of you, as you become familiar with the shape of the spine, so that you can actually think of it's the spine curving to the right that enables you to shift the weight onto the right. Okay, just check you're not leading with the elbows. And then pause and take a rest. Just take a brief rest again for a moment. And then come back to the front edge of your chair again, and then once more bring the left hand onto the top of the head. So just to rest it lightly on the head, careful you're not squashing your spine with the weight of the arm. And then return to bringing that left elbow down towards the left side of the pelvis. So again, if you're seeing me on the screen, it's not a big movement. It's not a big movement in space, but you can feel if you're allowing the pelvis to move, the ribs to move, and that right shoulder to go to the right and up. Can you feel how you're side bending to bring the weight onto the right hand side rather than tilting? Good. And then pause and take a rest. We covered some of these movements in one of the earlier FitSit classes. It was the one where I had the very squeaky chair, so I've made sure I've got the non-squeaky chair today. Please come back to the front edge of your chair, and this time bring your attention to your the right side of your pelvis, and see, can you think of lifting the right buttock, so as if you're pouring the weight down into the left buttock. So the right buttock will lift to pour the weight down into the left side, and you can play with the idea that as you're lifting the right side, you're pressing down into your chair or stool with the left side, so that you're pressing down with the left side as you're lifting the right side. So you're reaching down with the left side to help lift the right. You just notice it might be very different on this side compared to the other. And you can also just think, oh, does it help me to press down a little bit into the right foot to help shift the weight over onto the left-hand side. And then pause and just take a rest. This lesson, it features in chapter 1 of the book that hopefully will be out shortly. But please bring your right hand onto the top of the head. So again, just careful, you're not letting the weight of the arm sink the spine. So you want to think of the top of the head coming up to meet the hand, which is soft and light. And then think of taking the right elbow just down a little bit in the direction of the right side of the pelvis, and then come back. So not down to the floor, which would be a tilt, but just thinking of that the right elbow just going down a little bit towards the right side of the pelvis. And see if you can, what this hand position does, it kind of fixes the head in a certain relationship to the spine, so that as you're bringing the elbow down, it causes the spine to bend, to curve more evenly, and you can feel that shift of weight over onto the left-hand side. Can you begin to notice how the ribs on the right-hand side come into the body and closer together, and therefore your left side is getting longer. So as the right side bends and gets shorter, the left side opens out and gets longer. To see if you just notice that movement of the spine, and then pause, bring the hand down, and then just take a rest for a moment. And once you've had that brief rest, come once more to the front edge of the chair, and then just keeping the hands on the thighs once more, can you just think again of the pelvis, the right side of the pelvis lifting, the left side pressing down into the chair, and just see if that ability to side bend helps you to bring the weight onto the left side whilst keeping the head and eyes more or less in the centre. Now pause for a moment, and then once you've just had that brief rest again, bring your attention to the ribs once more, so this part of the ribs, the middle part of the ribs, and think of your ribs pushing like an old-fashioned typewriter carriage over to the left, and then come back. Okay, again, not a big movement, but you're just thinking of as if your hand or somebody's hand was here, and you're pushing the ribs into that person's hands. So just allowing the ribs to push over to the left. So just moving them over to the left. And then just check you're allowing the head just to be free, the jaw to be free, so that the right ear just tilts a little bit towards the right shoulder. Just nice, easy breathing. And then pause, let's take a rest for a moment, and then think again of your pelvis, the right side of the pelvis lifting, the left side pressing down, as you think of the ribs just moving to the left slightly. So you just including the pelvis and the ribs to shift or transfer the weight onto the left-hand side. Again, if it helps you, press down into the foot, the right foot, to help you do that. And just check again that you're not trying to do this with the elbow, so not pulling yourself over with the elbow, but think of moving from your middle. Now pause, just take a rest again, a brief rest for a moment, just to give yourself a break from the movement. And then when you're ready, come forward to the front edge of the chair. Bring your attention to your left shoulder, and then see if you can move the left shoulder a little bit further to the left, and think of it going slightly up and then come back. So the trajectory is to the left and slightly up. Not up in the sense that you're pulling the shoulder up to the ear, it's just the direction is to the left and slightly up. And then you come back. And you can feel, so if you're allowing the pelvis and the ribs to be part of this, once more the ribs are moving to the left, the right side of the pelvis is becoming light, and so again you're just shifting the weight over onto the left hand side, just by really thinking of the shoulder, the movement of the shoulder, but letting everything else be part of that. And again, you just want to be careful that you're not trying to do it with the elbow, which would be more like a puppet. You're kind of moving, trying to move yourself through the arms, but you're trying to find this transference of weight through the movement of your centre. And then pause and just take a brief rest for a second. And then once you've had that rest, come back to, so think of your pelvis, the right side of the pelvis lifting as the left side presses down into the floor. Just think of more of the pelvis for a few movements, and then bring the attention to the ribs shifting to the left. And then think of the shoulder going to the left shoulder going to the left and slightly up. So you're just alternating, thinking of the pelvis for a few movements, the ribs pushing to the left for a few movements, and then the shoulder for a few movements. And then see if you can begin to think of them all moving together, but particularly the pelvis. Pelvis is that you're trying to initiate the movement really from the pelvis and allowing the ribs and the shoulder to be part of that movement. And then again, just pause and rest for a second. So it's quite common when I've been working with people in the studio, is really the pelvis is kind of stuck a little bit, and then to try and bring the weight over onto one side is people could find it easier to move the shoulders, but it's almost as though the pelvis is an anchor, and it's really creating a drag that puts strain in the spine. So the more you can think of the pelvis initiating these movements, but allowing the ribs and the spine to be part of it, you'll find your movement improving quite quickly. Good. Now again, just pause for a moment, and then bring your right hand back onto the top of the head. So again, just letting the hand be light. And then just try again, thinking of the right elbow coming down to the right side of the pelvis a few times. Just see, just so you feel clearly that curving of the whole of the spine to bring the weight onto the left side. Good. And then pause and just rest for a second. Good. And then once again you've had that brief rest, come to the front edge of the chair. And now we're going to explore going from side to side. So bring your attention to the left side of the pelvis and think of lifting the left side of the pelvis, letting the ribs go to the right and the right shoulder going to the right and slightly up, and then come back, and then think of lifting the right side of the pelvis, left side pressing down, the ribs going to the left and the left shoulder going slightly up. So in other words, we're shifting the weight from one side to the other through side bending. So just bring your attention to the pelvis. So one side of the pelvis lifting as the other presses down to try and initiate the movement from side to side, just trying to keep the head floating in the middle, and then you can think of the ribs going from side to side, and then one shoulder going to the side and up, and then the other shoulder going to the side and up, to shift the weight from side to side. And then can you begin to think of the pelvis and the ribs and the shoulder being involved in this movement? So you're just transferring weight from one side and then to the other, just keeping the head and eyes floating more or less in the centre. And then pause and just take a rest for a moment. And then once you have rested, come to the front edge of the chair once more, and then bring your weight onto the left hand side again. So just see what it's like to bring the weight onto the left hand side, and is it a little bit easier for you to do now as opposed to tilting? Can you find that possibility of bringing the weight onto the left-hand side, and then the next time you have brought the weight onto the left-hand side, see if you can just stay there and just breathe for a few breaths. Just seeing if you can hold this position. So the right buttock will be a little bit light. The ribs will be side bent to the left, and your left shoulder should be a little bit higher than the right. And then come back. And then once more, bring the weight over onto the left hand side. So again, try not to lead this with the elbow. Think it's your middle, the middle of you that's doing that, and stay there. And now see if you can just move your right knee a little bit forward and a little bit back. So I'll just show you that from the side. So I'm on my left sit bone and I'm just moving that knee a little bit forward and a little bit back. So the foot stays exactly where it is, but the knee is going a little bit forward and a little bit back. And you can feel how your right sit bone, it's light, the right buttock, but it's as if it's polishing the seat of your chair, because the pelvis is moving, the right side of the pelvis is moving forward and back. Good. And then pause. Come back to the centre. And then begin to shift your weight, transfer the weight onto the right side. So you think of the left side of the pelvis becoming light, as if you're pouring the weight down into the right buttock, allowing the ribs to shift to the right and the right shoulder going to the right and up. and then stay there. Just see if you can breathe here, maybe even look around yourself, just you're staying over on that right hand side without tensing the jaw. And then can you move your left knee a little bit forward and a little bit back? So not out to the side, just bringing it forward and back. So the left buttock is light, and it's as if you're polishing the seat of the chair with that left buttock. It's the only polishing that gets done in my house. And then pause, and then come back to centre. Sorry. So just take a rest for a moment. So we have all the ingredients in place now to practice walking or transferring movement through side bending. So let's try that. So bring your weight over onto the left hand side in the way that we've been doing. So the right buttock lifts, the left one presses down, the ribs have moved a little bit to the left shoulder is a little bit to the left and up, and then move your right knee back about an inch, and then bring your weight to the centre, and then shift the weight. So again, try to initiate through the pelvis, so you're shifting the weight over onto the right buttock, so the ribs have moved to the right shoulder's going to the right and slightly up, and then shift your left knee back an inch or so, and then bring yourself back to the middle with the spine, shift the weight over onto the left hand side, and then move the right knee back an inch or so, and then come back to the middle, and then keep this going until you find yourself towards the back edge of your chair. So you're just practicing shifting weight. So in standing, of course, this would be on one leg and the other, but here we're on the sit bones, to transfer your weight to the back of the chair. And then once you get to the back edge of the chair, pause there. And then let's see if we can go forward. So shift your weight over onto the right hand side, slide the left knee, so of course the buttock slides forward too, and then bring your weight back to the centre, shift the weight over onto the left hand side, bring the right knee a little bit forward and come back to centre, and then shift over onto the right hand side, bring the left knee forward and come back to centre, and then see if you can continue to go forward towards the front edge of your chair, just nice and slowly. Again, you're trying to keep the head just like a balloon floating on top of the spine. And then begin to walk towards the back edge of your chair again. So I shift over onto the left hand side, or I transfer onto the left hand side, take the right knee back, bring the weight to the middle, try to bring the weight onto the right sit bone, and that creates the freedom to take the left knee back, bring the weight to the middle, and then shift the weight over onto the left side, take the right knee back, and that's it. So you're walking through weight shift rather than tilting towards the back edge of your chair. And then just see if we can come forward again. That's it. So nice, easy pace. Okay. The ribs, pelvis, shoulders, all participating in that movement to bring your weight forward and back. Once you get used to the way the movement is organised, you can then begin to speed up the walking forward and back, but don't hurry it. So it's important you be able to breathe freely as you do this without clenching the jaw, and then come forward once more. So again, just again, be careful you're not trying to pull yourself forward with the elbows. You're really just trying to practice this movement from initiating it from your center, this ability to shift weight from one side to the other to enable you to walk without losing your balance. Great. Good. And then just walk back to the front edge of your back to the chair, and just notice now. So if you thought at the beginning of the class I asked you to notice whether your weight was perhaps sort of habitually over onto one side or onto the other side. So again, I've had quite a few messages on the YouTube channel from people with sciatica, and I've been seeing a few people in the studio with people with sciatica. You can begin to see how if your weight is constantly held habitually onto one side, that's something that might be contributing to compression of the spine on one side or into one sacroiliac joint. And often after doing a lesson like this, you can find, I'm much more aware now that I'm evenly distributed over both sit bones as opposed to being onto one side. So I'd encourage you in the week to come just to practice your ability to move forward and backwards on the seat of your chair through this side bending, and next week we'll take it a little bit further into a twist.